Welcome to the podcast for Healing Neurology, where we talk about everything that can help heal your neurology, which is really everything from food, lifestyle, and medicine to nature, culture, and politics. There's no topic too big or too small. I'm Jillian Ehrlich, family nurse practitioner, certified in Ayurveda and functional medicine. And we have the incredible Nancy Nomellini here with us today. Nancy Nomellini is the owner of Mother Yoga Seattle, a sliding scale community-oriented yoga studio located in Chinatown area of Seattle, Washington. She has taught yoga in San Francisco, Seattle, and Thailand. Her favorite subjects to teach from are Bhakti yoga, the path of devotion, and Hatha yoga, the path of physical movement. She believes that bridging together is the path of love and action. So I have her on for a couple reasons today, mainly because she's amazing and her grasp of yoga really reaches both up into the spiritual world as well as down into the actual world in which we live, where our feet touch the ground, where our bodies connect and interact with each other, where we interact with the planet. And so I am thrilled that she's joining us. And her studio is on the verge, on the precipice of opening. This has been a pandemic love project and long dream. And she has a GoFundMe site. I don't usually talk about that on these podcasts, but I'd like to today because I am a real believer in her and her work. And so I'm going to list it here and we'll talk about it periodically. It's www.gofundme.com/manage/mother-yoga-Seattle. This studio is for the people, built by the people, for the people of the future. This is the link to the complete build out of the studio, and all of the donations in this GoFundMe have been from the community thus far. So when you hear her and her brilliance, feel free to donate to making this project happen for the people in this yoga family. Nancy, welcome.
Thank you, Jillian. I want to just first say everything you've said is so kind, and we're so grateful to have you as part of our community.
Yeah, I am super honored. I love your classes. And I have been to a lot of yoga classes since I started doing yoga over like 30 years ago. And I've had lots of different teachers. And there is a way in which you really bring it home. You make it both powerful and accessible and endearing and engaging. And I'm grateful for your support in my own practice. And we're lucky to have you here in Seattle. And I know, as you and I have talked, I'm not sure that this is like your vision yet, but I can't help but hope that you're able to reach more and more and more people. So looking forward to it. Thank you for being here with us today. And let's get started in the beginning with yoga, because we have not had a person talk about yoga from the ground up here at the podcast for Healing Neurology yet. So to start off, what is yoga? What is it?
So, we kind of went over some of these questions yesterday, and I wanted to do all of them justice. So I was like really sitting down with it. And I know this is maybe going to just come off kind of weird to the listeners, that I feel like the question is unanswerable, or it is answerable for every single person in a unique way, right? Like, I could just give the description that's been given 1,000 times. It's union, it's to reunite, it's to bring together your mind, body, and spirit. But you can Google all those things. They're being echoed from one person to another person to another person. The question to me is really similar to like the question of, what is love? What is life? Right? They're like unanswerable questions, but they're also completely answerable in our own experience. People write poetry about these things or large texts about them. And, there's so many people that long to like still discover the meaning of it. And we do have these deep meanings and revelations in our own experience from living. Sorry, I don't know if that is even like an answer to the question that I feel like is kind of unanswerable in a lot of ways. I don't want to limit it to it's point A to point B, and you have to do these things to get there. Or that it's even limited to like some sort of, postures or breathing exercises, because it could be a branch of yoga, but yoga's everything. And it's not one thing. It's not even a thing. Which I know, I feel like that's going to actually piss a lot of people off. They're going to be like, she didn't even answer the question. That's ridiculous. Oh my God. But I think that it is an invitation to keep some mystery, that you don't know everything and you don't have to. And nobody's really going to be able to like teach this to you, because you have all the answers in the experience of you being alive. And if you really have to like grasp for that, or still feel like you're waiting for somebody to tell you, what does it all mean? Just keep living.
So it sounds like yoga is this invitation to explore yourself, explore your community, to engage. And that is kind of engagement is the same as connection, or is the same as union.
Which I believe is always happening.
Mm-hmm.
Whether or not we're aware of it, it's continuous.
Mm-hmm.
And that engagement, I think, sometimes can be confusing for people, including myself,
Mm-hmm.
because I think that you need to activate it, like you need to start it somehow, that you're not doing it yet. But the engagement is always occurring. The yoga is continuous, it's always happening. And then we can become aware of it, that it is this continuous flow of recognition in ourselves, that we are here living, present,
Mm-hmm.
like being aware of being aware.
Can you talk a little bit about the different types of yoga, some of those different branches?
Yes. So Hatha yoga, which I really love, is like physical movement to stillness. And a lot of people have their own way of looking at that. Again, like it's just so wide, right? Some people are like, well, Hatha yoga, the classical traditional way of looking at it is like these postures created in India, right? Handed down from, teacher to student. But it can also be looked at as any physical activity of the body. Running, extreme just movements that haven't been like boxed up into names yet. And these are these classical Indian poses, these asanas that now have a name. But before they had a name, they're movements, they're breathing movements, they're physical movements that when done enough do create that stillness, which is really easy for people to understand because it isn't as confusing as relating through words, right? It's a different language of our bodies. Like you feel it in your body, and so you understand it. And going back to, the question of like love, like it because you understand it, not because you read it in a book and somebody laid it down in poetry format or, talked about an example of love in their life that seems familiar. But really understanding it within yourself and your own relationships with people and, animals and yourself, like how we truly understand love or try to. And I think that's hard because these concepts like love, peace, yoga, happiness, like we're longing to understand these things that, are really, really hard to grasp or like stay in.
And so what are some of the other forms of yoga, the other branches?
Another one that I'm pretty passionate about is Bhakti yoga. There's a huge element of it is devotion, being devoted to anything, and I feel like that is the yoga in our everyday lives. Like we're devoted to our families, we're devoted to our jobs, to the particular paths that we take, to our friendships, we're devoted to our health, we're devoted to being like of service. So that's like really broad too. And so these two kind of placed together is, for me, love in action. It's like you're devoted to whatever is your calling, and then you physically have to act to fulfill that.
Right. Which is why I think there are times that when we don't have the right things in our lives for us to be devoted to, I think we end up feeling very empty and sad. So if we're devoting a lot of time to commuting or devoting a lot of time to television or devoting a lot of time, if those are things that don't feed us and we end up spending a lot of time paying attention to them or doing them, I think that's when we can end up with struggle.
I think that's just a thought. I think when we hang on to that thought of I'm doing the wrong thing or I'm wasting my life, we have to really recognize that those are thoughts and to set a space behind that. I don't know, another definition of yoga is that space that holds the room for negative thinking or disapproval thinking, right? That we can categorize our thoughts and our actions of like, well, this is a waste of time. This is worthy of my time. This is whatever it is. And we're put in between those two aspects of this makes me feel good and this sukha dukkha, right? Like this gives me the kind of reinforcement of like, I'm doing the right thing and this doesn't. So sometimes even the practice of like physical movement can give you that, elated feeling And it becomes like a thing that you have to keep tapping into in order for you to receive that. But that you're receiving is already there. But to think that you have to keep going outside of it to a book or to your teacher or for some type of validation to prove that happiness lives inside of you is like a reinforcement to that it's not inside of you. That unless you do this specific formula, that you're not actually happy, that you're not actually peaceful, that you're not actually in that state of love or yoga, unless you engage or do these practices or these things. But yoga and love and peace and happiness, and when I say love and peace and happiness, those are other words for consciousness, right? That which isn't swaying between right and wrong, is, I think, a definition for peace or equanimity or love. It's not being swayed between good and bad. It is like this unconditional space. So it isn't judging like, oh, you didn't exercise. Oh, you're watching the TV. Oh, those are all the thoughts in that space, right? And doing, yoga asana or reading scriptures, or those are other thoughts that are also in that space. And as long as we toggle between those two, that is the state of duality.
And what does a state of duality, what does that mean? What's the relevance of a state of duality or a non-dualistic state?
Well, one, I have to say that I am a beginner on this path. I don't want anyone listening to think like, oh, she's like this. I mean, I'm learning so much. And from my experience and perspective of where I am right now, duality is a state of reality. Right? We are living in a state of duality, and to see it and witness it and also accept it. I think the acceptance part is engaging in that place of non-duality, is accepting, that these things exist together, that consciousness and the mind are existing together, that thoughts are in that space, and they're going to be in that space, and they live in that space, and that's where they're supposed to be. And they happen, and we're going to have those thoughts. If I'm not doing the right thing, I'm not living my life right, I'm not on the road to happiness, those thoughts are going to be there. And I think that the acceptance of it, the welcoming of it, the acknowledging that they are there is an opening into non-duality, which also, I feel like that's like another expression or description of that which encompasses duality is non-duality, like kind of like a sphere. And then inside of it, there's just these two different colors or spaces, but it's in that sphere that holds it all together. Or if you broke open the sphere and you just let it all leak out, that would be it too. Like however you want to shape it or see it, But I think that definitely one way that I see yoga is a state beyond arguing.
And what's another path of yoga, or what's another branch?
There's Raja Yoga, the path of like self-realization, transcendental knowledge. I could describe that as knowing yourself to be in connection with all beings, right? And that can be looked at, I think, as like seeing your place in the grand design of everything, your duty in your path in this world, whatever you've chosen, to trust it, to focus on it, to step into it, or how you're saying engage into it. And then also when you do that, realizing that everyone else has chosen theirs too. There's a person who's chosen to sit on the couch and watch the TV and it's chosen. Mm-hmm. And so it's like a respecting of like yourself and all beings, right? To me, that is self-knowledge, is the allowance and acceptance of everything as it is, but still fulfilling your role.
So Bhakti yoga, Raja yoga, Hatha yoga, any other types of yoga to discuss today?
Tantra yoga? I don't even know if it needs a yoga behind it. Tantra. I really vibe with Tantra because it is so rebellious. It is so not in the box. It is so mysterious. And I feel like Tantra really encompasses everything. Like, so if you were to unite all the paths of yoga, they would be inside Tantra, which is one of the oldest paths of yoga. And I don't know, I think a word that comes to mind is like rustic, ancient ways of knowing. When you talk about like our relationship to the planet and how long the planet has been here and the planets in the universe, like we are talking about Tantra, right? And how we relate to all of these planets. So our relationship, again, to everything.
What does the word Tantra mean?
To me, Tantra means rituals that we consciously or unconsciously take in our lives, symbolism, what that means to us, and looking at them deeply. Tantra is like nature, our intrinsic nature in nature.
Lots of history, lots of different kinds of yoga, lots of yoga that we live every day and every breath that we are living. How can we think about yoga across the ages? How do we think about yoga when it was created in the ancient scriptures? And then we can kind of transition into how we think about it in our current daily life. But can you talk a little bit about yoga from scripture?
So there's the history of yoga, right? People will break it down, people who translate the scriptures. There's a history of it, but it fades into myth. So it's like when you're even asking about like yoga or love, peace, happiness, it's like, did dragons exist? Did unicorns exist? Are love true? Are these things true? I mean, did Krishna exist? Did Rama exist? Hanuman, Ganesh? I mean, there's history, and then, there's what some people are calling myth, right? Where is the line in all of this? So the history of yoga, I feel like it goes back further than human existence, right? We're talking about consciousness itself, but then being put down on a paper, right? So I don't know when it began. It began when it began, right? When everything began, when life itself, when consciousness began, yoga began. That's what the scriptures are saying anyway, right? And that's, I feel like, also what we know. We know, like consciousness knows when we began, when this I am began.
Can you talk a little bit about some of the ancient scriptures that talk specifically about yoga?
Yes. And I definitely want to first off say that I am no Sanskrit scholar. So please, I hope that I don't butcher all of the correct ways of saying the formal names of these scriptures, so bear with me, okay? But the Bhagavad Gita is one of my favorite scriptures, and it is so relevant every time that I read it, because I feel something for it. It's not relevant for everybody. It's, you know what I mean? It's relevant if you feel a connection to it. And I feel like that's what helps people pick and choose their dharmas and their paths, is what's relevant to you.
And what is the Bhagavad Gita?
It's a discourse on yoga through the lens of Bhakti, right? Between Krishna, an avatar of Vishnu, and Arjuna, who is not only kind of Krishna's student in this text, but he's also Krishna's relative. They're related, so it's like the relation between the universe and ourselves. We're related, we're family. In the Bhagavad Gita, there's all, you ask me about the paths of yoga, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm drawing a blank. There's so many paths, but it'll outline them all, right? And Arjuna is a seeker, so he has tons and tons and tons and tons of questions. He's like, well, what if I can't do this? What if I can't do that? So that's why Krishna's laying down all these different paths, because he's like, if you can't do this path, then you have this one. And if you can't do this one, you have this one. Not that one? Okay, how about this one? I mean, he's just, Arjuna's like kind of giving him a difficult time, okay, if you will. There's like going on and on. And at one point in the Gita, he's even saying, if you don't choose any of the paths that I gave you, or if you see people that haven't chosen any of these paths I've described, know for sure they're still practicing yoga in ways that I haven't prescribed, Right? Some of the, people that have said to been enlightened or these sages, these saints, are smoking a pack of cigarettes. They're, on the side of the road, just tending whatever. And it's like, what's the difference between that and somebody, I'm going back to the TV one, I just can't help it, but like eating a bag of potato chips and on the television. I think the only difference is the attitude, is the mental temperament. Is that whatever it is that you're doing, right? In the Gita, Krishna talks about the action and inaction, right? And the inaction and action, right? If you're attached to the fruits of the outcome, or if your mind is unwavering and steady, or if you can just do the action and be the witness, doesn't matter what it is you're doing. But if you're attached to it, that's the mind absorbed in the action awaiting the outcome of the action and believing that we are our thoughts, we are our bodies.
So we talked in one of our other shows recently about spiritual bypassing, which is kind of the flip side of eating a bag of chips and watching television with pure awareness, would be engaging in very spiritual activity, going to a yoga class and doing breath work and having your mind still be heavy or having your mind still be attached to a particular outcome. Can you talk a little bit about spiritual bypassing?
I think to examine someone's mind, you'd have to really be them. I've seen myself go into a food kitchen and think like, oh my God, you're such a great person. Like, I can't wait to take a photo of you doing this so you can put it up online and say, look at the good work you've done. Mm-hmm. You can do the same thing for going to yoga class every day or church or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. But to go inside your own mind and really examine your intentions and your heart enables you to look into the world that way. There's a famous and an old saying, only a snake knows a snake. And only a saint knows a saint, right? We know what we see. So a lot of times when, we're called, that's spiritual bypassing, probably because we've done it and we know exactly what it is. Right? Uh-huh. There's a story in the Yoga Sutras translated by Swami Satchidananda, and he's describing this, like these different people walking down the street, and there's 3 of them or something, and they see a man laying face down in the ground. And there's no more description than that. It's like a piece of artwork or the world as you're looking upon it. And one guy walks by and he's like, oh my God, this man's an alcoholic. Look at him. He's just drunk, passed out on the ground, walks away. Another guy's like, looks at him and is like, oh my God, this guy's so lazy. He's so lazy. He just lays here all day. What a bum. The third guy walks by and he's like, this man is a saint. He's in full pranam on the ground, doing some long journey, some yatrika, like laying there, just, honoring the divine, at one, right? His forehead's to the ground. Who knows? Who knows? You know what I mean? At the end of the day, mm-hmm. Right? And there's an author I love. And a lot of people may look at her as someone who's spiritual bypassing or maybe onto something. Her name is Byron Katie. And I really love this talk I heard of hers where she was describing complaining. So seeing this piece of trash on the ground, we'll equate the trash with like all the turmoil of the world. And you see the trash and you're like, God, why won't somebody pick this up? It's been sitting here for days. It's sitting there and it's sitting there. I watch that person not pick it up. I watch that person not pick it up. I watch that person not pick it up. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go on TV. I'm going to write an article about how nobody's picking this up. Meanwhile, you're not picking it up. If you really want to pick it up, pick it up. So yes, I'm sure there's tons of people spiritual bypassing, sitting on the couch, calling it like pure awareness, whatever it is. It's not your problem. Mm-hmm. Or like how Ram Dass would say, the best thing you can do is work on yourself. The best thing we can all do is work on ourselves. Because whether or not if that person's spiritual bypassing or not is not going to help them. They've chosen their dharma. And you've chosen yours, and there's no time to be wasted, right? There's no time to be wasted of, pointing the finger here, there, and everywhere. There's time for us to actually take action on the things in the world and be accountable for our actions. And by that, lead as an example of what needs to be done.
So how do we know if we are spiritually bypassing? How can we tell if our own thoughts are accurate?
I think first, having a meditation practice. There's a book I love called the Bhakti Sutras, and the one translation I have is by Prem Prakash, and he's describing the path of devotion, like equating it to sitting by fire, and you feel its warmth. You can feel it, and you understand it, versus reading about a fire and saying, "Oh, that's what a fire is." Right. So for people that don't meditate, it's very, very hard to distinguish what's a thought, who's talking, and who's listening. So if you don't have that in place, it's like we're reading, but we're not actually experiencing it. We're reading all this stuff about poetry and love and relationships and self-care and self-help, but we're not doing it. So I think it's really, as you were saying, engaging, putting it into real life experience, right? You'll know when you know. It'll be very clear, right? When we're like attached to a thought that has no relevance, that has no opportunity to be of service or to be helpful or even just positive, when we're being very attached to something that isn't even in our immediate surroundings, like what is that going to do? What does that mean? Like, people are dying and being killed and raped and everything all of the time. You're aware of this? Yes. Are you aware that you're washing the dishes? Because that's where you actually are. Is that spiritual bypassing? Is it living in the moment? Is it yoga? Does it have anything to do with love? Is it peaceful? Yeah, if it's not peaceful, if you're not engaged, if you're not even aware of that, how could you be aware of something as monumental as like racism, sexism, poverty, animal cruelty? How can you be aware for that when it arises, when you're not aware for anything else, the small things in life every day, which is Tantra? It's making, as my teacher would say, it's drawing the mystical from the mundane. If you can't even see these things, these simple things, if you want to bypass all of this, guaranteed you'll bypass, whatever else is laid out in front of you, because you won't really be there. You'll be thinking, what's next? Or who else was wrong? Who else to be angry at? You won't be doing the work that's been laid out in front of you. You'll be too focused about who's not doing their work because you're not doing your work.
So we start with a meditation practice. We talked a little bit about this kind of in preparation for this show. How else do we weave timeless wisdom into tradition? How do we embrace what's relevant, let go of what's not relevant? How do we do that from our cultural standpoint, from our social standpoint, from taking this wisdom, which can be timeless about consciousness, and bring it into, 2021, end of a global pandemic? How do we do that? How do we weave these things back? How do you, when there's rape and tragedy going on in the world, how do you feel really good about washing the dishes? How do you bring those things together?
Okay. Well, no one person has all the answers. I don't care how many degrees they have. I don't care how many books they've written. I don't care how many brains they've operated into. If we're going to keep looking for that ultimate leader out there, I think that we're in a bit of a crisis. And I think that that's a constant searching for, like, what is this meaning, when all of us have it within ourselves, and we really need to come together and trust ourselves. And I think that is first going through meditation and seeing what's in there in each and every single one of us. I want to cite Sharon Salzberg when she talks about, she's a great meditator. And so many people come to her and she has so much experience. And so, she's getting questions left and right, everywhere, up and down, like people all day, every day asking her, what do we do when this happens? What do we do when that happens? That's a lot of pressure to put on somebody. One, Two, you're not going to be here forever. Three, you're not going to listen to everything they say. You say you want an answer, but a lot of times when you go to a teacher, you're like, oh, I felt like, yeah, sure, that makes sense. But you're not going to do it. Mm-hmm. You're not going to do it. You're going to live your life the way that you want to live it, And the answers are all there in the way that you're living. If we could just see how we're living, see everything. And anyway, so these people are coming to her and this meditation meetup. And this man stands up in the audience and he's just like, I feel so awful. I feel so awful because I look at the world. And this was a decade ago, okay, before this pandemic, okay, a decade ago. And he's like, I just look at the state of the world and the poverty everywhere and, the violence everywhere. And I can't help but also know that I've been blind to all this and that I'm a part of this. And I'm a part of this ignorance, right? You could just hear it in his voice, all the guilt and the shame and the just not being able to get beyond the thought, And it's not that the things that he's stating aren't a reality, but he's just so engrossed in it. It's just so dense. And one thing I love about Sharon Salzberg is that not only is she relatable, she's kind. So she, when she spoke to him, she wasn't like, oh God, this guy clearly hasn't meditated long enough or whatever it is. But she gave him a story. And that's what I love so much about a lot of these scriptures. As I've said, a lot of them go from history down into myth. It's like they're stories, which also makes them relatable, which also makes God relatable. And she was saying she had gone to a nurse's ward with one of her friends, and it was a trauma ward. And there was like the most tragic patients there, patients that just really weren't probably going to make it, And she was with the head nurse who was with her friend. And the head nurse was telling her, the only nurses that are allowed on this ward are not the ones that relate to the patient's suffering. The only nurses that are allowed on this ward are the ones that relate to the patient's resilience. Now, as a child, I got hit by a car when I was little, and there was a lot of nurses that would come in and coddle me. Like, I could see how pathetic I was in their eyes, because I was really, really banged up. It was a hit and run. I could see, it was like empathy, sympathy, but it was very much this like, oh my God, I'm this fragile thing, Mm-hmm. And I've also had the, experience of being with nurses that are like, okay, now you're going to do this and you're going to be just fine. You're going to get through all of this because I believe in you. And the difference of that transaction of energy, communication, and yes, teaching, it's just completely different. So yeah, I don't know if that's a roundabout way of like kind of going into that, but yeah, what good is it going to do anybody just relating to suffering all day and all day in and out versus like, the uprising or hope, the upliftment of what people are capable of. I mean, the thing about meditation at first, is focus. We have a really hard time focusing. What do you want to focus on? You want to focus on everything you're not doing right? Or you want to turn it around and focus on the things that you are doing well? Or the focus of everything that's going wrong in the world, or focusing on what we can get right? Focusing on everyone that's spiritually bypassing, or those that are doing the work. Because your mental energy is being absorbed. And that's what matters the most, is where you live, in what state of mind you live in. Yoga, love, peace, happiness. Do you live actually in this space? Or are you living someplace else? That space is always there when we're aware of it. I mean, even when we're not aware of it, it is there because we're continuously returning and coming back to it. And it's inside.
In talking about this talk, one of the things we talked about was some of us come from traditions which can be associated with oppression. Mm-hmm. Like our families oppressed others, or we oppress others, or how do we find our footing? How do we employ timeless wisdom and reinvent our own traditions?
So I would say from, receiving my certification to teach like physical yogic postures, that like following that lineage of a kind of family tree would go to Krishnamacharya, and tracing it back to that lineage. And loosely quoting him, he would say that all the teachings of yoga remain exactly the same, unbroken, but that our mental attitudes and the attitude and society of this world are what's always changing, but that the practices of yoga continuously stay the same. And I think that that's a timeless wisdom, that peace, love, happiness in yoga, consciousness is always there.
Your lineage talks about how the wisdom of yoga is timeless, but we take it into kind of our daily life.
Yes. And I was saying how like Krishnamacharya, loosely quoting him, would say that the yogic teachings, the practices are always the same, but it is like our attitudes in the society that are always changing. And what I take that to be is peace doesn't change, right? Love, consciousness, all that, it's unchanging. It's been there before us, after us. It is the beginning, the middle, and the end. But as our minds, create this world that we're living in, that's all changing. That's evolving. And the timelessness is forever there as well. It may be harder to be aware of it because I think things are moving at such a more rapid pace that it is hard to find these practices of things like meditation and awareness. I guess one thing I also want to mention as far as like traditions and accessing yoga goes. I grew up in a really, half of my family background is very Christian. And I remember driving the car with my mom one time. She was driving. And we got on the topic of heaven and hell and being saved. Because I couldn't understand why her church needed to go to like far remote places in China to like save these people, right? And what she was basically trying to tell me was that they didn't have access to these teachings, access to God. So, I had asked her, well, I've never been baptized. Am I going to go to hell? Because you're saying if you don't go over there and save these people, they're going to go to hell. And she was like, she wasn't even thinking. She didn't even see, the thought just arose and then she spoke. And she was like, yeah, you're going to go to hell. I was like, wow. The thought wasn't even just right out of the mouth. And I'm mentioning that because I think that it can become really tricky thinking like, who doesn't have access to yoga? Who doesn't have access to God? Who doesn't have access to awareness? And that we need to somehow implore these teachings out into the world and make sure that everybody is saved somehow to carry this lineage on. Everybody has access to these deep and profound teachings and the awareness within themselves. How they get there is their journey, is their road. If we can kind of meet each other down the way, that's beautiful. But I don't believe that we have to, and I don't believe that it's a mission. It's like looking out into the world again, seeing like what we know in ourselves. If I'm looking out in the world thinking, oh my God, nobody's awake, nobody's aware. I mean, what's going on in me? I think it's really trusting that like, we're all experiencing this for sure. I don't need to waste my time thinking somebody isn't awake or isn't aware or isn't doing the right thing. That's a lot of energy I would be spending in that direction.
And so where does justice or where does injustice fall into this?
Into yoga or consciousness? Dharma and duty in the Bhagavad Gita, like Krishna is saying, do your dharma, even if it's imperfectly, rather than doing someone else's perfectly. Someone else could just, have all the answers to all the questions, and you're just stumbling around, and you have to do what you feel like you're being called for. And when we talk about justice and injustice, it's like a waterbed. Injustices, there's 1,000 of holes springing up with water spilling out. Where are you going to put your finger? Because you only have 10. Maybe you have 1, okay? So, it really is picking and choosing your battles. And we all have them. We all see injustices every single day. But which ones really call you to fight? What is your duty? Is it the exact same as mine? I think it's also important to remember in the Gita, another one of my teachers always has reminded me that in the Gita, like the entire mental kind of frame is like Krishna's in the chariot and Arjuna's asking him to drive it. He's asking him to hold the reins. And the reins are the senses. So you're not going everywhere. You're focused. And you're driving it somewhere. You're driving it all the way home to wherever it is you need to go with this life. And on the banner of the chariot is Hanuman, the monkey king of devotion. Right? You look out and he's fighting all of his relatives, friends, people he's known forever, because it's his duty. And this is what he feels called to do. And Krishna's by his side and their family too. But it's also really important to remember that Krishna is actually Arjuna, and he's the horses, and he's the chariot, and he's everybody that's fighting. He's the ground itself they're fighting on. So don't be even too attached to what you're fighting for, because then you'd be making it about you and not the fight itself.
And that's why Bhakti Yoga devotion is not any particular object. It's about the devotion itself.
Krishna says you can worship me in form. It's much easier to relate to something like you can kind of like envision. But people also worship me in the formless, that which cannot be named, that which cannot be seen. Like, go ahead, pick and choose. I mean, Krishna is so free with his teachings, right? I think it's confusing when we try to put everything into a box, if it has to be this way or that way, and giving permission for people to pick and choose their paths, and knowing that at some point when your paths cross too with all of these different beings, that you may need to be like even going against them. That's okay. In the Gita, he talks about doing the action. Krishna talks about doing the action and surrendering the outcome, doing what you feel compelled to do, but not suffering from it because it's not about you, though it's in your nature to be the way that you are. And we definitely all have a nature, and that just leads into a whole different realm of like karma, and karma being like everybody's involved in it, not just like one person relating to another person, everybody, big, huge wheel spinning of karma, and how all the suffering, the misery, everything, we've involved ourselves in it. We're guilty of it, for sure. But we're also part of the upliftment and the change. So we see injustice in the world. Who caused that? Who caused all those blind spots and those things to happen and the poverty? Who's a part of it? Right? We have one finger pointing out, and the saying is you have three fingers pointing back. Mm-hmm. Look no further, right? So injustices, how to bring about justice. Be accountable. Pick up the trash. Take out the trash. Be there when you're taking out the trash. See the trash every time it comes. Do something about it. Stop asking other people to do it. You do it. That's huge because that's Arjuna being willing to fight. He's not asking someone else. At first, he's going to ask Krishna. It's like, come on. What's your purpose then? People will follow, right? It's like, I feel like, a lot of your questions is like having an answer, somebody who has answers. People follow leaders that are doing the actions. So I think that, instead of having somebody just spill out a lot of answers, is watching somebody who's doing the work. And then more people coming together with people that are doing the work, and then everybody doing the work together. Instead of a bunch of like formulas in a book or saying, well, this could be a great theory, doing it.
So tell us a little bit about Mother Yoga Seattle, and let's kind of refer back to that GoFundMe. So it's gofundme.com/manage/mother-yoga-seattle. Talk to us about your yoga center.
We have such a special community of people that are so willing to come together to create something for the future. And it's a merging of so many different types of people. Like my husband is in the skateboarding community here. In a lot of my students, it's like age-wise, it's all over the place. Early 20s, late 60s, people from all different cultures and backgrounds invested in creating this center, within the ID Chinatown district of Seattle, that is also rapidly growing and progressing. And we want to see what's going to happen from all of us coming together. All of us who don't necessarily have the answers to the world, but we can at least come together and create this micro community of something that hopefully works. Picking up the trash here. What can we do from here? Plenty of trash in that area, let me tell you. Just seeing what we can do from where we are right now, living in that reality. If you've ever gone to Seattle, which is where we are, gone into the International District of Chinatown, there is a very, very large homeless population. And to me, that's like the metaphor of, you see this trash and you're like, why isn't someone picking it up? Why? Before you even start scanning what's going on in Cambodia or India or Tibet, you better do something about, all those people that are waiting for help underneath the bridge 10 feet away from you. Because otherwise we're just reaching too far, something too lofty. When the reality, it's like, it's right here. The accountability, the love, the consciousness to see that right here. So Mother Yoga is coming into this neighborhood as a community, willing and wanting to work with the community there in hopes of seeing what can happen from here. And knowing that there's so many other places in the world that are doing the exact same thing, that have been doing the exact same thing. Just people coming together, which to me is another definition of yoga, just coming together.
What are some things we might want to keep in mind, like as your studio opens, as we all collectively start to emerge from the pandemic? What are some things to keep in mind about this particular point in history?
We were talking about this yesterday, is to know that we're at a tipping point. We've been progressively marching towards this point collectively. It's not one person's problem, it's everyone's problem. This earth is turning into a huge bundle of trash for us to look at and pick up together. And if you're picking it up, if you're doing the work, it's going to inspire others to do the same. That's what's going to be inspirational, is seeing each other do the work. And there's a lot of work to be done. One of my little holes on the waterbed that my finger's in is veganism, because it touches on so many levels of peace, of love, of yoga. It's something that we can do every single day that creates these huge waves out into the world, a world that can span on longer than humanity. So much of yoga is also really, and I have to say this, is that we are not just our thoughts. We are not just our bodies. And as long as that we're attached to that, of course we're attached to humanity. Why would I not work for just my family or just human sake? The earth has been here so much longer and hopefully will continue after humanity is gone. Why should I fight this battle if I'm not going to see the outcome? You know, the Bhagavad Gita is like a short portion of, I'm going to botch the way to say this, so I'm sure someone out there will correct me, but the Mahabharata, right? In the end, Krishna is not there. Arjuna is not there. There's a few that survive. Doesn't mean you shouldn't fight. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do the work. So, you know, veganism is a huge part of tipping the world back into balance. And this planet is in connection with all the other planets too, with the universe. It's a deep relationship that's gone out of balance. Right? And in the Gita, you know, there's another like little golden nugget where Krishna says, age after age, I come back, you know, like I come back to this realm. Was Buddha real? Was Krishna real? Is love real? I don't know, right? You're going to know when you experience it. Could it be real to bring the world into balance, into peace? We'll only know when we start ourselves. You can't, right? I mean, it sounds so cheesy, like you can't operate from a place of anger and wanting to generate peace into the world, or a place of judgment and wanting to see peace in the world. How can we start from that? What would be the aftermath of something like that? Not to say that those things don't exist in myself, because the reality is that those thoughts are there. But to keep turning my focus into a different direction, putting my energy into a better suited place for my dharma will be a better act of service for everything and everyone. So yeah, veganism, we were talking about it yesterday, and it involves a lot of awareness in your choices. It doesn't matter. Why should this matter? Even just beyond eating animals. Like I was reading the other day, the crisis of avocados in South America, and how, you know, these places would rather give water to growing the avocados, to selling them, to making money, than water to the people that have no water. So when you go to the store and you're like, oh yeah, I heard about that, but I'm going to buy this anyway. You're actively making a choice to participate in violence, and you know it. So spiritual bypassing, yeah, it can happen while you're grocery shopping. Like, I mean, let's keep it real. It's in everything we do. It's like, you know, one of the people that I love is Osho, and it's like people will be like, eye roll, God, that guy's crazy. But there's profound wisdom anywhere you want to hear it, in everybody, in crazy people, you know. And one of the things that he says is like, people are always looking for this big thing, this big thing, because you want to be this big person with this big impact. But it's the little things. Life is filled with the little things that you don't want to pay attention to because it doesn't matter. And veganism is one of those things. It matters. It matters that, you know, so many animals are being killed every single day, and what that does to the planet, and how much water we spend and money, and how much we're partaking in this violence, and then actually putting it into our bodies is crazy. It's craziness. And then to ask for justice after we participate in that all day long is like, I don't even get how that works. I think, yeah, it all comes back to self-examination, our experience of our lives, being accountable for ourselves again and again. And it's scary. It's so scary because you realize what a big impact you have in the responsibility. That word scares me to death, because it's like, really, that's what's going to wake you up from the TV, from sitting at the TV. You're like, I'm responsible. I'm responsible for being here and what I'm going to do while I'm here.
So any last thoughts before we close about branches of yoga, about living yoga, about where we're headed, about emerging from the pandemic? Any last thoughts?
I think coming out of the pandemic, there's a big responsibility for every single human being to do the best that they can do in helping the planet and helping one another, and really trusting the goodness, the inherent goodness within ourselves, feeding that a little bit more than anything else.
All right. Well, Thank you for listening today with Nancy Nomellini. We've got lots of ways to continue this conversation through Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. You can get more information about Nancy and her classes at www.motheryogaseattle.com. And you can find her at the GoFundMe also, or find Mother Yoga Seattle at the GoFundMe, which is gofundme.com/manage/mother-yoga-Seattle. And you can find more about us at our website, centerforhealingneurology.com. Please be sure to share this show with your friends, and we welcome your rating and review wherever you get your podcasts. And feel free to send topic requests to podcast@centerforhealingneurology.com. We love that you've joined us today to discuss how to make our whole world medicine. We rise or fall together, and we're committed to doing what we can to make as many of us as healthy as possible. And this takes all of us, including you. Thank you for listening, and see you next time.
Partyfish Media.
Partyfish Media acknowledges that it operates and records on indigenous Duwamish and Puget Sound Coast Salish land that is still home to the Duwamish tribe. This land is stolen in violation of the Point Elliott Treaty of 1855. We are committed to uplifting the name of these lands and community members from these nations who reside alongside us. For more information on this land, its people, or ways you can help, visit duwamishtribe.org or realrentduwamish.org.